If we want to allow ourselves the muscle of feeling all the good stuff, then we have to be willing to risk feeling the hard stuff. We push down the hard feelings because they're uncomfortable. So we really condition ourselves to not feel the hard stuff on this side of the spectrum.
Because being vulnerable doesn't mean being weak. It means actually the opposite. You're actually being strong because you're allowing yourself to be vulnerable to attack, judgment, but yet you don't care because you're so strong and secure in yourself. I think it's the most masculine thing you can do. Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the TPM podcast. Once again, we are joined by the great Andy Torr, and we're having a great dialogue off camera, and I wanted to bring it on. You guys do not want to miss this episode, so let's kick it off. Andy, you were talking about some really great topics here on emotional intelligence. Why don't we just have that dialogue?
Yeah, sure. Hey, Doug, it's great to be here. We were talking about a masterclass that I did for the Brotherhood on emotional intelligence, the 3 parts. And really, when we talk about emotional intelligence, we're talking about trying to understand what the different feelings signal to us as humans. So a great example, just to understand what emotional intelligence means, a great example is anger. What's anger, right? Well, anger is a sort of a first response. It's a protective mechanism that calls us into action and calls us to focus on something. It's actually a very important emotion for men because it moves us into action. But it's very difficult for us to receive anger from somebody else. And so when we become emotionally intelligent, we can look at anger and say, okay, behind anger, there is always an unmet need or a perceived injustice. So rather than reacting to the anger, can I look behind that? Can I see what is actually being communicated to me? Or perhaps if I'm feeling angry, what's actually behind my own anger that I can express maybe a little bit more cleanly than just being mad? So that's a sort of an example of what we mean when we talk about emotional intelligence. And one thing that a lot of guys really want when they come into our programs is they want to be happy. And there's this spectrum of emotions. And on one end, we have all of the positive emotions, the happiness and the joy and the fulfillment and everything that we want to feel. And on the other end of the spectrum, we have all the stuff that's really difficult to feel, the grief and the regret and the shame and the anger and the fear. And what most humans want to do is we want to feel all of the good stuff.
Yeah.
We don't want to feel very much of the bad stuff.
Sure.
Right? Which is very natural because the bad stuff is uncomfortable. And so particularly as men, what we do is we condition ourselves to not feel the hard stuff. We push down the hard feelings because they're uncomfortable. Yeah. And so if we feel anger, we push it down. If we feel shame or regret or guilt or fear, we push it down so that we don't feel that feeling. And so we really condition ourselves to not feel the hard stuff on this side of the spectrum. Maybe we feel a little bit angry, maybe we feel a little bit scared, but we never allow ourselves to go all the way. And here's the really interesting thing about our psychology is that when we condition ourselves to not feel the hard stuff, we lose the ability to really feel the good stuff.
Exactly.
And we end up operating on a very narrow emotional bandwidth that most guys call even keel.
Yeah.
That guy's pretty even keel. Yeah. You know, he never gets too happy. He never gets too sad. He's sort of in this emotional gray space, you know, bouncing back and forth between a very narrow band of emotions. And for my money, Doug, I don't know how you feel about this, but for my money, that's no way to live, right? Our emotions really are the juice of life. To be able to drop into not only the good stuff, but the hard stuff allows us to really maximize the most out of life. And so what guys want is, I want to feel all the good stuff, but I don't want to feel any of the hard stuff. Well, the truth is that if we want to allow ourselves the muscle of feeling all the good stuff, then we have to be willing to risk feeling the hard stuff. And that word risk is really important, Doug, because if we're willing to risk going all the way into our fear and our sadness and shame, usually we don't have to go there. But the willingness to go there means that we can be more open to receiving the stuff on the other side, the really good stuff that we want to feel.
I love that. You know, you can't see the valleys without getting to the peaks or vice versa, you know. And for some reason, Andy, in our culture, being even keel is almost like a badge of honor. Yeah. Like men look at this. You know, Stoicism was really big a few years ago. I mean, it seemed like every book coming out had to do something with being a stoic, right? And I think what men miss is some of the practices of real what Stoicism really is about. And they took it to mean I have to be just neutral, no emotions about anything. Everything's logical. I'm going to be a computer. And when men go down that route, they really miss the zest of life, if you will, the passion, right? And imagine how if you're doing that, if you don't have the passion, you're definitely not bringing that to the bedroom, right? Your wife is now having passionateless sex. That's got to be fun to be married to a guy that has passionate sex all the time. And so you're not painting with all the colors. And the analogy I always use, and you've heard me use this probably too many times because I have young kids, is some guys are only coloring with like the 3 crayons they give you at the restaurant, right? When they give you that placement with your kids, not the 64 box of crayons that have all the good colors in them. Exactly. And they miss that spectrum.
There's hundreds of emotions.
Yeah.
Hundreds of emotions. And, most of us operate with 4, mad, sad, glad, and afraid. And those are the most accessible emotions to men. Usually the easiest emotion for us to tap into is anger, right? And because it's close to the surface. So you mentioned Stoicism a few minutes ago, and Stoicism, as you mentioned, is not about not feeling.
Correct.
It's about actually being deeply in touch with what's going on inside and connecting with it and understanding what it's trying to teach us, but not letting those emotions sweep us away and not letting those emotions govern our actions.
Yes, it's about not being in deer mode. Exactly. Don't react, right? The R in deer stands for reaction. And this reminds me, Andy, so in my early 20s, I had a client that I was working with, and this guy just had wisdom beyond his years, right? Yet I'm still working with him. And I remember him coming in, he and I were talking, and he's just like, I'm just down. His name was Richard. And I go, what's wrong, Richard? Now, being in my 20s, right, what do I want to do? I want to lift Richard up. I'm going to do it. I'm going to make him happy again. And as we were talking and dialoguing and trying to figure out why Richard, just felt out of it, he said, Doug, you know what? I'm going to sit in this. I'm going to give myself 2 days just to sit in this. And he described it really well. He said, Doug, I feel like I just have this warm, wet wool blanket just draped over me. It's really heavy. It's kind of that wet, warm, kind of moist feeling. And I just feel down, like kind of like Eeyore, if you will, And, but what he said was like, if I can't sit in this and just sit in this feeling of being, being down, being depressed, then how am I ever going to be able to sit in happiness?
Wonderful.
Yeah. It was such a nugget. One of those things I'll never forget that conversation. Yep. And you know how your clients teach you so much as well. And, shout out to Richard. He's a great guy, very successful for obvious reasons. He is very in touch and in tune with himself and his emotions. And I think as men, we get to be. And that's what it is. It's attunement rather than being reactive.
Exactly. And there's a really interesting knock-on effect. If we are unwilling to sit in our sadness and to really connect with our fear or our regret or the things that are difficult for us to experience, if we just touch them lightly, then it becomes very uncomfortable for us when the people around us drop into their emotions.
Yes.
And that calls us into people-pleasing behavior or problem-solving or fixing, right? Oh, you're uncomfortable. I don't want you to be uncomfortable because I know what it feels like to be uncomfortable. So I want to fix you.
Yes. Yeah.
And sometimes the kindest thing that you can do for a loved one is to let them sit in their mess and figure it out and just hold space for them.
Now, you're describing me in my late teens, 20s, when a girlfriend would cry, right? I wanted to fix the issue, which brings me back to issues, I think, when I've done the work of my mom crying, or I need to solve this. I need to make this person, it's my job. It's my job to protect them and make them happy. And I would go into that mode of whenever a girl would cry, I'd be uncomfortable. And either I'd fix it or I would exit. I would leave. Now, I may not physically leave, although I did often, but I would emotionally just shut down because I couldn't deal with that emotion. Breaking up with a girl is a perfect example. So I'd break up with her, she'd start crying, and I'd fix, oh, no, we're good, I'd laugh at it looking back, but that was me not being able to handle those waves of emotion.
And we tell ourselves a subconscious story, your discomfort is making me uncomfortable. And so in order for me to feel better, I need you to feel better. Yeah. And that's at the root of the nice guy, people-pleasing behavior.
Oh, it really is. And when you think about men, I think one of the things that I've discovered in my life, and you and I share this, I use the analogy of Indiana Jones a lot, right? And that's worked for me. Like I want to be the adventurer in my own journey. So I go inward to explore what's going on inside of me and figure out where it's coming from, what's happening. And anger, when someone gets angry at me, I'm at a stage where not all the time, I'm not perfect by this by any means, Andy, as you know. But when somebody gets angry with me, a lot of times I can step back, take a breath, and really just be present and hold space for that person because their anger doesn't affect me, right? Their jealousy, their laughter, their jokes, it doesn't affect me because I'm so grounded in who I am. I've done the work to do it. Again, not 100% of the time. I don't think anybody's 100%, but being effective in that. And I think that's a tool a lot of men can get, and Stoicism can teach this to them as well. But it's really understanding who you are as a man or as a human and being so grounded in that you're not reactive. And if I can add one more point to that.
Sure.
This is where your wives, not yours, but other men's wives can have issues, right? She knows that if you can't handle her emotions, how the heck are you going to be safe for her, or how are you going to protect her from the guy down the street, who's been checking her out or somebody else? She doesn't believe that you are now emotionally safe enough to be around. And if you're not emotionally safe, then she's not going to have connected sex with you either.
Yeah, exactly. So there's two questions that we can ask ourselves as men when we want to connect with our emotions. And one is, what's going on inside of me right now, right? Can I put a name on that emotion, right? It might not be precise, but it might just be, I'm feeling some kind of way. I'm feeling frustrated, right? Okay, first question, what's going on inside of me right now? Second question, can I sit with this?
Yeah.
And these are the two fundamental questions of mindfulness. Mindfulness is not about stopping thought or stopping emotion. It's about creating an emotional clearing within the mind so that we can observe ourselves. What's going on inside? Can I sit with this? And can I really connect with it? And can I understand? Am I telling myself a story, or is there something going on? Really funny example. I was on a long flight recently, and I noticed myself all of a sudden just getting really angry. I was like, what's going on? Like, just out of nowhere, I was really angry at somebody. And this was going on in my head, and I just stopped and I breathed and I thought, what's going on inside of me right now? And what I realized is that I'd been sitting for a long time and I was having a muscle cramp and I was really uncomfortable in my physical body. And my mind had come up with a story to map to the pain that I was feeling in my body. And as soon as I realized that, I let go of the anger, and then I stretched out my body and I felt way better.
Well, that's attunement, right? And you've gotten to a level that, and a lot of men, that are listening to this, you want to get to this level where you can actually check in with yourself and realize what's going on. Just like if your wife says something or does something, all of a sudden you get upset or angry. What is actually the story you're telling yourself behind that anger? Where did it come from? Where does that trigger? Right? So as an example, what guys can do here is, if they get angry, something upsets them, their wife says whatever, they get angry or upset, a good thing to do is check back, okay, when else have I had or experienced this feeling? Right? And go back to the first place you can remember. What was going on there? Because most likely that's what's coming up for you. That whatever happened isn't what your wife said or did. It's just stirring up an old pattern inside of you. And once you get to the source, now you can create a clearing in that area and therefore be more in control.
Exactly. So step one of emotional intelligence is to connect and understand what's going on inside. And then step two is to communicate that. And this is where we get into the realm of vulnerability, to be able to talk about our feelings, not in a way that makes other people responsible for our feelings. We don't want to barf up our feelings on our wife's shoes and make her responsible for our anger, our fear, or our shame. But it's, hey, this is what's coming up inside of me right now. And I'm handling it, but I just want you to know how I'm feeling so that you know how to navigate me.
Yeah.
And as men, when we suppress our feelings, when we don't communicate what's going on inside, it's almost like our loved ones can't read us at all. It's almost like we got a blanket over our heads. They can't see us. And because they can't see us, they don't know how to navigate us. And they end up walking on eggshells.
Yeah.
What's going on inside of him? Why isn't he telling me how he's feeling? Is he mad at me? Did he do something? Should I be mad at him? And there's all kinds of safety questions that get asked by our loved ones when we are not willing to share what's going on inside. Sharing what's going on inside does not mean we have to empty the closet of skeletons, that we have to be completely 1000% vulnerable, but simply to say, this is what I'm feeling in this moment. And it's not for you to manage. I'm managing it, but I just want you to know.
Yeah. It's so interesting, Andy. a couple of the guys today, not today, but this week at the retreat, the Alpha Reset that we do, had mentioned their wife's not feeling safe.
Yeah.
She's not safe, right? She tells me I'm not safe to be around. When I'm safe, then we can start having great sex again. And this is part of what they could be talking about here is, if you can't actually honor and experience your own emotions and you become reactive, you aren't safe. You aren't safe to be around. You aren't safe to share. It's not a safe place for her to share who she is or what she's going through, because you're going to react. You're going to jump on her case.
100%. And for guys who are listening to this who are interested in a longer conversation about emotional safety, you and I did a podcast called You Didn't Understand the Assignment.
Yes.
A little while ago. And so anybody who's interested in listening to a longer conversation about the ingredients that go into emotional safety, that's a great podcast for guys to check out.
Agreed 100%. And so I also want to clear up something, because I can almost feel or picture, if you will, maybe the older version of me going, talk about my feelings. Come on, man. I picture, and what I used to picture, Andy, is kind of some whimpering, weak guy who's sitting there sobbing, a more feminine guy, sobbing and talking about all his feelings and what have you. And what I've come to learn, that's not the case at all, right? So let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I think that there's a lot of nuance to that, right? Mm-hmm. We want to provide our loved ones, particularly our partners, when we're in our protector provider mode. We want to provide them with an opportunity to see us communicating our emotions in a way that shows that we are managing our emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And so we don't necessarily want to be the slobbering mess in front of our wives, because that transmits maybe a lack of safety for her. And so this is where having a community like TPM is really fantastic. When you can communicate to another guy or another safe person, and maybe it's a relative or maybe it's even a therapist or somebody like that, and just let all of that stuff out with them and process it and understand what's behind the emotion, and then come up with perhaps a more nuanced, a more refined version of that we can communicate safely to our loved ones.
Yeah. I'm going to give I 100% agree. And I think also for the guys listening out here going, I don't want to talk about my feelings. Really, all you're doing is, when you say talk about your feelings, you're just expressing what's going on for you. You're giving everybody else a heads up. Hey, this is what's happening for me. And you can do it in a very masculine way. In fact, I think it's the most masculine thing you can do, because most men, are scared. They're scared to talk about their feelings, so to speak, because they don't know what the heck they are. They don't know what's going on. People are going to judge them. What are they going to think if they know that about me? You and I hear that all the time from the men. And the truth is, because you're scared, if you do it anyway, that's courage. We talk about this a lot in the podcast. Being afraid and doing it anyway, that's courageous. And we celebrate the firefighter who runs into the fire to save the kids. Are they scared? Heck yeah, they are. But they do it anyway, and they're courageous. You can be courageous in your own relationships with yourself and with others by being vulnerable. Because being vulnerable doesn't mean being weak. It means actually the opposite. You're actually being strong, because you're allowing yourself to be vulnerable to attack, judgment, but yet you don't care because you're so strong and secure in yourself. And when my wife talks to women, they say that's probably the most sexy thing a man can do.
It is a superpower for men. And it's also a muscle that you develop over time.
Yes.
Right. It feels really uncomfortable at first, and for guys who are listening to this, who have been pushing it down their whole lives, it's probably terrifying the first time they do it. But what happens is that when we express what's going on and the people around us receive it, we realize that the world doesn't end.
Yes.
And I'm not excommunicated from everybody that I love. And in fact, people thank me for letting them know what's going on inside of me, because now they know how to navigate this relationship. And so the more we do it, the easier it gets. And then we develop a greater ability to do it. And when we model vulnerability for our loved ones, particularly our children, particularly our young men, then that just makes the world a safer place for everybody.
I love it, man. I always enjoy these conversations with you, Andy.
Likewise.
Thank you so much. Gentlemen, the moment of insight, take massive action, we always say. And guys, if you're in the Brotherhood or the Inner Circle, our 1-year mastermind programs, you have access to Andy's course. Go check it out. It is absolutely amazing. I mean, we are just barely scratching the surface. That's all we can do in these podcasts. We try to give you guys as much as possible. But for those guys that do have access to it, take advantage of it. Andy has so much knowledge that he dumps right into that masterclass for you guys. So go look it up and take action. For the rest of you, take some notes, go back. Andy's talking about what is emotional intelligence? What happens? Where is this showing up for you in your life? And how can you be better? Don't be the deer. Don't defend, excuse, explain, react. Instead, be the wolf, wise, open, loving, and fierce. Remember, life is too short for average guys. So take some action now. And we'll see you next time on the TPM Show.